Good afternoon, delegates. Please take your seats. Delegates, can you all please be seated? Thank you. We will continue with the other matters. And when we adopted the agenda, there was also a request to include change in the cutoff date indicated in para 17 of decision 28-2 by Egypt. And a CRP has been submitted by Egypt on this agenda item. And now I would like to give the floor to Egypt to introduce it.
Thank you very much, Madam Co-Chair, and good afternoon, everyone. First, I would like to thank the Secretariat for publishing the CRB in session document in their website. And I have honor to present this CRP. As you may recall, during the MOP 28, parties adopt many decisions. One of those adopted decision was decision 28/2, and regarding the cutoff date. The decision 28/2, paragraph 17, states that the cutoff date for the country with a baseline year from 20 to 22 is the 1st January 2020. Noting that Egypt ratified Kigali in 2023 in August, 22nd August 2023, and noting that the exceptional circumstances related to the COVID-19, the pandemic, and without setting a precedent lead to delay the ratification of Kigali Amendment of our country. Before the ratification, a few factors have been established after the cutoff date, unfortunately, in the absence of the ratification of Kigali Amendment, which is essential to facilitate issuing national regulation to ban the manufacturing of domestic air conditioning unit based on R410A. So, having explained this, we propose a decision for your consideration, and it is a simple one, just to revise the paragraph 17 of the decision 28/2 to read as follows: that the cutoff date for eligible capacity is 31st December 2020 for those parties with baseline year 2020 up to 2022, and 1st January 24 for those parties with baseline years from 2024 up to 2026. Thank you for your attention, and the draft decision is for your consideration. Thank you, Madam Co-Chair.
Thank you. And now I open the floor for questions and comments. I do not have anyone requesting for the floor. So what I propose is that we will come back to this agenda item later when delegates have time to discuss during the course of this week. Thank you. And we also forgot today morning to hear back from the VSLS contact group. So I will see one of the co-chairs of the contact group, if they are here, to report back. Germany. Heidi.
Yes, thank you, Madam Co-Chair. We had our first meeting in the contact group on VSLS during the lunch break yesterday. We jumped right back into the CRP and started discussing and cleaning up the operational paragraphs. We made good progress. Parties were very flexible to compromise. However, we could not manage to finalize the paragraphs, and there remains text that needs further discussion and consultation. We would therefore need more time during this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. We will indicate time and venue later. And with this, I will hand over to my co-chair.
Thank you, Miruza. Then I would like to go back to agenda item 4B, Roman I, emissions of HFC 23. And we have two CRPs posted, CRP 7 and CRP 8. And I would like to ask the proponents of CRP 7, US and Canada, to present it, and then we go to CRP 8. US, I guess. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. I have to admit, I guess too, we didn't coordinate the presentation with Canada, so I'm looking at Philippe to see if you wish to take the floor. Just put your hand up and I'll turn it over to you. He's not putting his hand up, so I will proceed. So just to say, so we submitted this CRP last night as a follow-up to the discussion that we had yesterday as an outgrowth of the report from the SAP and the TEEP. You can see it on the portal. I will just go through it quickly. Just to say there are two preambular paragraphs that in effect, the framing we're trying to provide is just to express in some way the concerns over measured atmospheric abundances of HFC 23 being substantially higher than would be expected on the basis of reporting. The two paragraphs relate to two specific conclusions that are articulated in the SAP report and are included in the executive summary. And then moving on to the operational paragraphs, the first paragraph is a request to parties to share relevant HFC 23 monitoring data with international monitoring networks. And on a related matter, the second paragraph asks parties to update Article 7.3 TARE reporting to reflect the most accurate data on emissions of 23. Paragraph 3 reminds parties manufacturing Annex C Group 1 and Annex F substances of the obligation to ensure 23 emissions from relevant facilities are destroyed in accordance with Article 2J. And then on 4, it's a request to parties with substantial differences in their reported emissions as compared to the emissions derived from atmospheric monitoring to do two specific things. The first is to undertake actions to implement 23 obligations under 2J and adhere to any commitments undertaken in the multilateral fund. And then secondly, a request to investigate the potential reasons for such deviations and submit that information to the Ozone Secretariat. Paragraph 5 then requests parties producing HCFC 22 to submit information to the Ozone Secretariat on the methodology to estimate their HFC 23 emissions from those facilities, as well as any information on verification or quality assurance processes. And then the remaining paragraphs are requests specifically to the SAP and to the TEEP on various aspects. Paragraph 6 really asks the SAP to provide an update to the report that they've provided to this meeting on atmospheric concentrations of 23. Paragraph 7 is a request to the TEEP for information on, so there are multiple facilities in the world that are intentionally producing HFC 23, and I think it would be actually quite useful to get some very specific information about those facilities and the overall level of market supply and demand for HFC 23, given that we're presumably collecting large amounts of byproduct HFC 23. Paragraph 8, another request to the TEEP to provide information on verification guidelines that were used under the Clean Development Mechanism. For those that recall, these were projects probably from a decade or more ago on HFC 23 emissions control. And then finally, paragraph 9 requests the TEEP and the SAP together to further clarify possible reasons for the discrepancy between atmospheric monitoring estimates and reported emissions. And I left out a few details in there. Some of these reports, and we left this in brackets, some of these reports or information, I think the simpler parts we could see being done ahead of the open-ended working group. But for example, the requests to the SAP and this final request in paragraph 9, we think could actually be better served and the parties would be better informed and get more information if those reports came in before the meeting of the parties next year. And so with that, I would close my introduction and ask if my colleagues from Canada would like to add anything additional. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any reaction from Canada, so I assume that this was the intervention that Canada was also looking for. Then I would like to go to China and ask them to introduce the CRP 8. Please, China, you have the floor.
Thank you, Co-Chair. Yesterday at the plenary, the delegation regarding the HFC 23 emissions and the data reporting, we have delivered a statement. We also listened carefully to the common issues and shared concerns by other parties. Based on this, given the serious concern about discrepancy in HFC 23 emission data and the different capacities, we proposed a document, namely CRP 8. Regarding this CRP document, we have the following consideration and suggestion for next step for the consideration of all parties. First, currently, the reasons behind the great gap between observation-derived emissions data and those reported by parties under Article 7 remain unclear. This calls for collaborative research among parties' researchers to study the emission mechanisms, including known and unknown emission sources. This will help address this shared issue. We therefore hope that all parties encourage their research institutions to cooperate internationally on HFC 23 emissions research. As for the relevant requirements, they are reflected in paragraph 3 of the CRP document. Second, The HFC 23 emissions reported by parties are generally visibly lower than observation-derived emissions data, reflecting limited understanding of such emission mechanisms by parties and discrepancies in accounting and reporting methodologies. We propose that all parties share their practices and hope that the Secretariat can establish an expert team to comply parties' practical experience, through which a technical guide for accounting and reporting HFC 23 emissions under the protocol could be developed. As for the relevant element, it is reflected in the CRP document, namely paragraph 2 and 4. Third, HFC 23 emission levels vary across parties due to different production technology, equipment, and management. This is particularly true for Article 5 countries, which often lack monitoring methods and emission reduction technology routes, especially for fugitive emissions. We note that TIP report mentions best practices. Therefore, we suggest that countries with best practices with relevant experience share their technologies and knowledge and information to assist Article 5 countries in implementing HFC 23 reduction practices tailored to their national conditions. As for the relevant element, it is reflected in para 2. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, China, for introducing your CRP. I would like to ask if there are reactions from other parties in the room on the CRPs, and otherwise I already could put a way forward, and I see China on my list. And India afterwards.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Regarding this 2 CRP, I wish to make some comments. First, I thank the Secretariat for its hard work, which uploaded past midnight the CRPs on Canada, US, and China's proposals regarding the HFC 23 emissions. Though delegates may not have sufficient time to study both, from the introduction just now, I trust you can sense the common grounds and the differences between these two. In terms of the common grounds, both proposals express concerns about the uncertainty surrounding HFC 23 emission and the data reporting, and both seek to clarify these issues. However, upon comparison, it's evident to delegates that China's proposal is more objective, science-based, pragmatic, and fully respects the ongoing efforts and the capacity differences of parties, demonstrating a genuine intention and attitude to identify, study, and solve issues. In contrast, the proposal from Canada and the US lacks adequate consideration to the weakness in scientific research and capacities, imposing in a simplistic and reckless manner additional requirements beyond the protocol obligation, even revealing distrust in parties' compliance. In particular, the tendency to frame a global issue as a problem for one country, namely China, as if China possesses some super ability to resolve an issue that 198 parties and the scientific community cannot clarify. We consider this thought to be beyond belief. We believe that the US and Canada proposal has 3 issues. First, unscientific. Recent reports from SEP and TIP, along with discussion with the scientific community and under the protocol framework, highlight that regarding this emission, especially it's the actual emission amount and the sources, much uncertainty still exists. It is also difficult for parties to report data accurately, and therefore there is a significant gap between the reported emissions and those derived from observations. US-Canada disregard this uncertainty. Second, in practical, current research suggests that it's difficult for SAP, TIP, and parties to provide more valuable analysis or obtain more accurate data on HFC 23 emissions before further research and greater technical capabilities. Just now, when we're talking about the implementation committee's presentation, we noticed that many parties encounter difficulties in reporting data. As for the HFC 23 emission, the so-called accurate reporting is quite difficult. Both countries disregard the feasibility, insisting that SAP, TIP, and parties undertake such actions. We fail to understand the purpose of such requests. Third, disrespectful to the parties on compliance obligations beyond the protocol. If it is hoped that parties undertake additional actions, we believe the conference should ask or invite parties to do so, which also involves collaboration of all. Parties act at their discretion on what they consider reasonable and feasible. There should not be mandatory terms such as request. In terms of wording, we strongly proposed US-Canada refer to China's wording. Of great concern is Para 4 of the US-Canada proposal. It seems to imply that these parties generating HFC 23 have not taken necessary measures to fulfill their obligations under the protocol. We wish to ask, from where does this assumption arise? Over the past 4 decades of the protocol, we have seen trust, cooperation, and mutual support. For example, during yesterday's discussion on MB, although some Article 2 countries, since 2005, the cutoff year, due to its own reasons, continue to seek exemptions, but we still see tolerance and understanding of other parties, and we were sincerely pleased and congratulated us on being the last exemption request. So, on an agenda item as complicated as HFC 23 involving many parties, why there is an absence of goodwill and support? Do we believe that suspicion and accusation can resolve issues? Are we willing to see that the protocol depart from its spirit of mutual trust and unity and move in the other direction? We express our deep regret and concern. In general, we believe that certain elements from both proposals can be combined. We wish to engage with the parties, particularly the US and Canada, to jointly reach a decision grounded in science, good faith, and feasibility. However, we wish to emphasize that our discussion must adhere to the following principle. First, we firmly oppose any description or requests targeting specific parties. Second, we do not agree to requests that disregard the scientific consideration or the parties' capacities. Third, we will not accept any language that disrespects any party. Thank you.
Thank you, China. I have India on my list, and if others would like to speak up, please let you know. I see India and then Kuwait and others. Then India, Kuwait first. India, please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. We thank the delegates of the US and Canada for CRP 7 and China for presenting CRP 8. Mr. Co-Chair, practices to control emissions of HFC 23 as a byproduct are consistent with those used to control other emissions associated with chemical manufacturing process and regulatory controls. These are well in place and implemented by the countries. Further, parties producing HCFCs and HFCs are also obligated to implement the provisions of Kigali Amendment. Next, countries have well-defined frameworks, including national regulations for controlling and monitoring and reporting of emissions for controlled substances. We feel the focus should be here on seeking additional information from the SAP and TEEP, particularly on the differences in estimates of emissions, including on uncertainties on the Article 7 data instead of introducing new elements here. Mr. Co-Chair, we strongly feel and we have serious concerns on certain elements like assessment of needs of intentional production, CDM guidelines, and the UNFCCC guidance on HFC 23, which we feel are not relevant in this forum. Having stated this, we would like to assure you, Mr. Co-Chair, that we stand ready to discuss the CRPs further. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and also good to know that you're willing to discuss the CRPs further. Then I have Kuwait and the European Union, and I would like to ask if others would like to take the floor. If not, oh yeah, I see Kuwait, European Union, United States, Australia. Are others wanting to take the floor? Otherwise, I would like to close the list. So it's Kuwait, European Union, US, Australia. Kuwait first.
Thank you very much, Mr. Co-Chair, and I would like to thank the both proponent for CRB 7 and CRB 8, Canada, USA, and China. I think, as it's mentioned from both of these CRBs, that the good intention and will of collaboration together to reach our goals is there, maybe in a way that everybody have his understanding and the way that he see that this is the best way to solve that issue. And with understanding all the elements in both CRBs, I just want to say that, as the distinguished delegate from India mentioning, we would like to deal with HFCs 23 under the understanding of Montreal Protocol rather than understanding it or deal with it under the climate regime and the climate way and thoughts. Saying that, and just to give a chance for others to speak, I think in both CRBs there are so much similarity of request in a different way. So I think as it's the first element that I see is very relevant to both is that the deviation in figures between SAB and TEEP. I think this is one of the issues that it's been clear for both of them, and we need to clarify it. So this is the startup of the engagement of this one. The second thing, I also mentioned that I'm not in favor of specifying a specific country or a specific one when we are just investigating issues and we want to relate to this one. And within this frame, I think that if we have a sort of informal contact group or a dialogue between the interested party who have an issue with NHFC's 23 byproduct to have a chance to meet and look to these ones and come up with a Midland solution, that will be a great job. And I'm very sure and trust China, USA, Canada, India, and the remaining that they have the will to do it. And I'm sure at the end of this meeting, both CRBs will be one CRBs that satisfied all the needs of the parties. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Then I would like to give the floor to the European Union.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. I think the reporting back yesterday and the answers given by TEEP and SEP did underline that there is really a significant difference between reported emissions and measured emissions in the atmosphere. As parties, I think we have benefit of engaging on this and seeing where these differences can come from and what the actions are that we could support to correct it, including improving of reporting and reducing emissions. We understand that collaborating on that makes sense. We would be ready to do so, and we think that both papers have relevant actions and elements that we should discuss as parties. So we would be ready to do so in a contact group. Thank you.
Thank you. And I would like to give the US the floor.
Thank you, Co-Chair, and just to say thanks to the EU for those brief comments, and I think to his point, agree. I think we can have a useful discussion in the contact group. I think there's useful elements in both proposals. I think certainly we stand ready to talk those through and hear from other countries and try to find a compromise solution that we can move forward with. I just wanted to come back on a couple of points that were raised with respect to our proposal. I think maybe the first is to just explain, when we see the word request in a decision, and maybe this is an interpretation issue, but we don't view that as a mandatory requirement in terms of what a request is. And of course, we have several of those references in our own decision, so perhaps that's a helpful clarification for this body. Secondly, just in response to the point raised by China, there's nothing in our decision that refers to compliance or non-compliance. I'd say it's also not unusual in cases to have language that recalls or reminds us in some way of what the obligations are under the protocol. And then thirdly, just to say, we listened very carefully to China. We're still thinking these points through, but just to be honest with you, we didn't listen. The reason we came forward with this decision, it wasn't just because we were interested in this issue. As the EU just said, there's quite a substantial gap here. And the information, and this is scientific information, we have on the gap relates to both a global assessment based on monitoring data, but indeed, we have some very specific regional data. And so I'd refer you, and I mentioned this before, so I was trying to explain this. Some of the specific references in our proposal, they are directly related to the science. And if you look, for example, at the SAP report presented to this meeting, it's page 4 in the executive summary. It's the third paragraph on page 4. It's information from a scientific study from 2015 to 2019 on regional 23 emissions estimates derived for Eastern China. And so that's the reason that we have some of these specific points in here. So I think there is some common ground. We agree that there's a global issue here. I think we also agree with China. I think a discussion, and you see it both in what China's put forward, but also in what we've put forward, like having a discussion about some of these estimates and what the methodologies are, those types of things, that does strike us as a constructive discussion. All I would say is that from our perspective, it's not the only discussion. And I think if we want to find a solution to this, and I think in the end, and I think I said this before, I actually think we all have a common goal in mind. It's to reduce the amount of HFCs that are in the atmosphere. I think that's all of our commitment, every single country in the room, including all the proponents that have put forward decisions here. I think we have that goal, but we're now getting some scientific information that's suggesting something's not quite right. And listen, there's things that aren't quite right that happen all the time. This happens to be something that's not quite right. That's about 10,000 tons per year of a substance with a global warming potential of 140,000, and we have some geographically specific information on this. And so, listen, I think we approach this with an intent of mutual respect for every country in the room. At the same time, we have some very specific information that I think we really need to think about, and think about what it tells us and how that can lead us to solutions. And this isn't the first time we've seen sort of a similar information from our technical panels that I think has sort of helped guide our discussions here on a wide variety of issues in terms of having them help us to identify problems and challenges and to work together as parties to try to find solutions to those. So listen, we appreciate a number of the preceding interventions. India and Kuwait raised some issues that certainly we're very willing and happy to talk about. I think if we could go to a contact group, I do think there's a fair amount. There's some overlap, there's some not overlap between the two CRPs. But I certainly think we can sit in a contact group, work together as we always do, and come up by the end of this week with, I think a reasonable solution that will help us take, I think, some definitive steps forward in terms of trying to come to a solution to this issue that I think is in the interest of all parties. Thank you, Co-Chair.
Thank you, and I saw that Australia didn't want the floor anymore. We have a short break. We'll talk with my co-chair. Thank you for waiting. Let's say our proposal is to have those two CRPs be treated in a contact group and to see how the elements can be, let's say, merged, or how that can be dealt with in a good way. I think there was openness and willingness of a lot of parties to talk about the CRPs and look at the elements. So those two CRPs in one contact group, is that agreeable for everybody? I think it's agreeable, yes. And the two co-chairs of those groups, I will announce them now. There's Chantal Wellington from Barbados and Paul Kreinig from Austria. So with this, we concluded everything from the plenary today, and we can go into the contact groups. And one moment. We look into the schedule of the contact group. One moment. Thank you for waiting. Let's say it was puzzling. Let's say we were looking how to schedule it, because there are a lot of meetings also with regional groups and others to figure out how we could manage. So I will announce it now, and it will be put later on screen, and also exactly where. And also due to the amount of groups we have to schedule some in parallel. So I ask also for your flexibility on that as well. So from past 4 till 5:15, we have one group on MDIs and one group on HFC 23 forms, so the reporting forms. From 17:30 till 18:30, strengthening Montreal Protocol institutions. And then from 18:45 till 19:45, LRM, life cycle refrigerant management. So I will do it once again. So 4:15 till 5:15, MDIs in one room, and then HFC 23 reporting formats in another room. Then from 17:30 till 18:30, strengthening Montreal Protocol institutions, and from 18:45 till 19:45, life cycle refrigerant management. And now I'll give the form to, I wanted to give it to Meg, because then she can put it on the screen. Let's say the rooms will be mentioned in a moment, but at least, let's say one of them is CR2 level 2, and we have to look for the other room that will also be put on the screen in a moment for the group at 4:15 that is also taking place. So I have, let's wait for a moment, then we know for sure in which room. So please, it's on the screen now. So, and tomorrow morning at 8:45 till 9:45, HFC 23 emissions. And I would like to wish everybody good luck in the deliberations in all the contact groups.